Hey, today we're going to talk about the geography of polarization. We're spending the final 4 weeks of class talking about polarization, and today we're going to talk about how geography matters in all of this. Okay, so let's just sum up from last week. We said that partisanship is a voter or politician, particular party or ideology. This is not necessarily a negative thing. What we are talking about these days is polarization, and that is a divergence of political attitudes to ideological extremes. And last week we talked about Abraham Owitt's argument that there is polarization going on, and he says that on a 7-point ideological scale, fewer voters are choosing 4 and even 3 or 5, and more voters are choosing 1, 2, 6, and 7, which shows that we really are growing apart. There is a greater consistency of voter opinions about issues. So if you are a Republican, you're likely, if you say that you are pro-life, it probably means you're a Republican. If you say you're pro tax cuts, you'll probably be a Republican. But there's also a correlation between people who are pro-life and pro-tax cuts. So that's the kind of greater consistency. Um, on issues, but then the parties themselves have put together greater consistency within their parties. So if you think back to like the 1950s, where you had the Southern Democrats and the Northern Democrats, and the Northern Republicans and the Midwestern Republicans, and just had a variety of opinions within the party. And so we because the parties are now ideologically aligned, we're seeing greater alignment within those parties, but that then takes us further away from people in the other party, gives us less in common with people from the other party. So tonight we're going to just kind of add to that, and we're going to add to that concepts of positive partisanship, negative partisanship, and affective partisanship. So there are good reasons why parties form and why parties encourage affiliation. When you are a member of a party, it motivates you to vote. It motivates you to participate in campaigns. It motivates you to stay involved in the process. Positive partisanship can also be where you get cues. So when you go to vote, you probably haven't researched, in one of like the general presidential elections, you probably know who you want to vote for president. You may even know who you want to vote for senator, governor, congressperson. But when it comes down to the lesser positions, for the positions that you probably haven't gone out and done a lot of research for, one of the cues you have is the letter after their name. So if you're voting for a mayor, and they've got an R or a D after their name, that tells you something about them, and gives you that kind of cue. And those are all good things about partisanship. So partisanship isn't inherently bad. Um, when parties are ideologically aligned, it makes it fairly easy for people to choose a party because it correlates with their own beliefs. And we have a situation where, because the Republicans are the conservative party and the Democrats are the liberal party, it allows people to align with the others that are similar to them ideologically. What we get though is where we run into trouble is where we run into negative partisanship. That is where your ideology is formed largely in opposition to the others' ideology. So it's not so much that you're for something as you're against something. And I think that maybe President Trump takes this to an extreme. It's really hard to say what Trump is for without saying what he's against. You know, I mean, and that wasn't always true. Or the what you were against was kind of a common enemy. You weren't against another group in America. Affective partisanship then is the process of steady dislike, uh, or the process of steady and mutual dislike between Republicans and Democrats. So as the Republicans hate the Democrats hate the Republicans, then the Republicans go one step further, and we get this spiraling almost out of control. And that is where we are now, and that is why people care about partisanship and polarization. And so one of the things we have to say is, why is this happening right now? The biggest differences in voting are things like race, religion, education, and economics. These are things that do not just apply to politics. When you look at the type of person who buys a Mercedes versus the type of person who buys a Prius versus the type of person who buys an entry level Ford Fiat, it tells you something about their race, their education, their economics. And so we see these kind of decisions where you can point to a car a person owns or a neighborhood a person lives in and say, this is their demographic, their probable demographic profile. So it's not just politics, but as politics has taken an increasing role in our lives, we're applying it to that. Um, Increasingly, though, we're seeing that like people live in close proximity. So if you think about um, communities where everybody is very, very similar in terms of education, economy, and stuff. And what ends up happening is that when you live with people who are just like you stop you start seeing that as normal, and anything outside of that community you live in as abnormal. And so maybe when we talk about polarization, we shouldn't ask why. We should ask where, and finding out where people are living and how that's affecting their polarization can be a big step to understanding what's going on. Um, when this is a study that was done between the years of 1953 and 2013, and what they found was that in the 12 years that are most partisan, 10 of them happened between 2003 and 2013. And so just see a time when this negative partisanship, this affective partisanship, is really, really big. So in 2013, which was the last year of this survey, only 10% of Republicans approved of Obama, and 86% of Democrats approved of him. It's a 76-point gap in approval ratings between Republicans and Democrats, and it hasn't always been that way. Here's another kind that we're starting to see. This is a 2014 Pew Research Center study, and they asked people two different questions, and then they asked them their partisanship. And so the first question was, it's important to me to live in a place where most people share my political views. Consistently conservative people, 50% of them said yes. Consistently liberal people, 35 of them say yes. When you are kind of in that middle, three-fifths, we see that 29, 22, and 25%, mostly conservative, mixed, and mostly liberal, say that. When we go over to most of my friends share my political beliefs, we see this going up even more. Among consistently conservative people, 63% say that most of the people they know are ideologically similar to them. Mostly conservative also see a lot of that. Consistently liberal see a lot of that. Whereas people who describe themselves as mixed or mostly liberal probably have a variety of contacts. Okay, I'm not pivoting here. I'm building to something, but we also see a steady decline in trust in government institutions. And so this is a study that came out that's asked, do you trust government most of the time? Do you think the government is run for the benefit of all? And do you think the government does not waste a lot of tax dollars? And so I know you can't see it here, but like in the 1960s, oops, 1960s, we had people who said this a lot. If And then it went down, and the peak raised. If you go back to the slide, the peak raised. We came back up in the 19 in 2002, and so what we see is that the trust in government is correlated with how people feel like they're doing economically. And in 1992, Bill Clinton's political strategist, James Carville, posted something on the wall of the campaign headquarters, and he said that it's the economy stupid. And he also had healthcare in the statement. But this idea that everything boils down to the economy, really, really important concept in politics. Let's take a step from that and think about there's this old quote that says, it's a recession when your neighbor loses his job. It's a depression when you do. And the idea that the economy that there's a personal and a national economy is very important. But when we see people living in groups, we see that if all of the computer science programmers are being laid off, and the only people who live in your neighborhood are computer programmers, you're going to see that it's a very bad time in the economy, and you're going to extrapolate from that it's a very bad time everywhere, not that it's just something in the computer programmer world. Similarly, if you're in Ohio and your community has lost its manufacturing base, you're going to think, it's not just me. It's not just I got unlucky or I was lazy or, I punched the boss. It is that there is something going on, and everybody I know is experiencing it, so it must be much more widespread. And so there is a difference then we have to understand in national recessions and regional recessions, and we'll get into that in the next video.